We're now in version 6.1, and if you're still stuck trying to clear endgame content, even after having some of the broken characters in the game, this video is going to work wonders, especially for players who've been playing for years but are still struggling to clear endgame. We'll start with the must-have fundamentals and move up to the most important tips and advice while making a clear priority list. So let's start with the first step: weapons and artifacts. There are a few weapons that are must-haves for any account if you want to clear the toughest endgame content. The first is the Favonia series. These are the core of almost every team, providing the most important thing a team needs to function: energy recharge. Especially with the release of Stygian Onslaught, the value of these weapons has increased even more. And if you're thinking, nah, they're not that important, that might be the reason you're still stuck. You can use Favonius weapons on any support to generate energy for the entire team, making your team synergy insanely strong. Talking about energy, we can't forget another weapon series, the sacrificial weapons. This is the second best weapon series and a must for any account. Not only do they give you extra energy by letting you reset your elemental skill, they're also a perfect backup option when certain characters struggle to get enough particles, like Sucrose and Xingqiu, who are often played as solo Anemo or Hydro units in a team. You can always switch between these depending on the situation. For example, if you need a higher base attack bow for off-field damage dealers, go for Sacrificial Bow. But if you just want to focus on energy recharge, go for Favonius, especially on healers like Diona. Once you've built these, the next step is artifacts, and this is where most players go wrong. I've seen hundreds of accounts where people have 40 CV artifacts for their DPS, but not even a single energy recharge piece for supports. That leads to bad rotations, poor synergy, and massive damage loss. So what artifacts should you prioritize, regardless of what characters you have, because these are universal and broken. Let's start with the sets you should have at least one functional pair of. Point out: Viridescent Venereer, for Anemo characters, it's a must. Noblesse Oblige, for team-wide attack buffs, especially for burst-based supports. Tenacity of the Millilith, for supports that rely on elemental skill uptime and off-field application. Emblem of Severed Fate, for burst-based units like Xiangling and Xingqiu. Deepwood Memories, for any Dendro support. Gilded Dreams, for elemental mastery and attack scaling. Marichase Hunter, one of the most universal DPS sets in the game, especially if you have Farina, or even without her, works perfectly with most Fontaine units. Golden Troop, for off-field damage dealers that rely on elemental skill. And Scroll of the Cinder City, for damage bonus across all elements, even providing at least 12% extra damage, even if the character isn't from Notlin. These are the sets that are must-haves and should be your second priority after weapons. Coming to the third priority, team formation. This is one of the most fundamental parts of the game. Even after building your characters properly, you can still struggle if you don't form the right teams for the right situation. Before that, it's important to understand the different team structures in Genshin Impact. There are several types of teams, like Hypercarry teams, where you bring 3 buffers or supports to maximize one on-field DPS. Some of the biggest examples are Mavuika Melt, where Zilonin, Sitlali, and Bennett deal less than 10% of the total team damage, but provide insane buffs and elemental application to boost the on-field DPS. This setup includes teams like Nuvolette Hypercarry, Kinich and Mualani teams, and even Skirk teams, where Skirk alone can deal over 60% of the total team damage. Even Nefer is often played as a hypercarry. These are the best setups when you just want to focus on one strong DPS. You only need to build your main damage dealer and can even give F2P options like Favonius weapons to the rest, since their damage contribution is minimal. Next, we have reaction-heavy teams. These are setups where every character has strong elemental application and the team relies on constant reactions between them for maximum damage output. Some of the most popular examples are Electrocharge, Lunar Charge, and Dendro setups, where every unit's build matters, since all 4 work together to deal consistent reaction damage. So which setup is actually better, and which one should you prioritize to get the best results? As mentioned earlier, Hypercarry teams are easier to build, and thanks to several broken characters, they're also the strongest right now. But they have one huge downside. Since the majority of the damage comes from a single element or unit, if the enemy has high resistance to that element, your team can become completely useless. This is where reaction-heavy teams shine. They use multiple elements and reactions, making them the most universal and safest option for endgame content, since they work against almost every type of enemy. However, they're much harder to build. You need to invest properly into all 4 units, which demands more time and effort. So what's the ideal balance? If your goal is to clear endgame content efficiently, build 2 teams, one Hypercarry and one reaction heavy. Most Abyss or endgame floors have enemies with mixed resistances, so being able to swap teams gives you flexibility and consistency. It's also crucial that you check your team's actual potential, because even if you form 2 teams, if one of them has poor internal synergy, you'll still struggle to clear content effectively. Which brings us to the next step, building the right characters. Some characters are utterly broken, while others are locked into very limited team archetypes. It's always better to invest in flexible units that can fit multiple roles and team types. For example, Sucrose. She can act as an on-field driver in reaction teams and also serve as a support in Hypercarry setups, holding Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers and Viridescent Venerer in teams like Mavwika Melt or Flim's teams, providing massive elemental mastery buffs. Other must-build units include Lanyan, Fischl, Kuki, Yansan, Bennett, Xingqiu, Xiangling, and Chevrus. Most of these are 4 stars and available to the majority of players. If you want a full list of the best universal units, including both 4 stars and 5 stars, let me know in the comments. Now for some important tips once you've finished building your core teams. Rule number 1. Never prioritize vertical investment over horizontal investment. Vertical investment means spending your resources on constellations or weapons for a single DPS without having proper supports built. It can make one team stronger, but you'll struggle later when that character gets power crept or faces enemies that counter them. Horizontal investment, on the other hand, gives you more team flexibility and future options. If you do want to vertically invest, only do it when necessary, like for Hu Tao or Ryosli, and always prioritize DPS upgrades over supports. Rule number 2. I've seen players pulling weapons for supports before upgrading their main DPS, and if you still think that makes your account better, you're dumb. Main DPS units contribute 60 to 80% of the total team damage, so boosting their output always gives higher returns. For example, Xilanen's weapon gives a 25% team-wide pyro bonus, but in practice, it only adds around 8 to 10% total team damage. Compare that to Mavwika's weapon, which boosts total team damage by over 20%. So in most cases, it's better to invest in the main DPS's weapon rather than a support's. Rule number 3. Hidden buffs. There are underrated synergies in Genshin that can give you huge boosts without spending resin. For instance, the 4-star set Instructor might seem weak, but it can work wonders in elemental mastery-focused teams, like Flint's teams or with characters like Xilanen, since her buffs from Cinder City or Archaic Petra don't benefit the new meta units. Running Instructor can provide resistance shred and bonus EM for free, no resin cost, and sometimes it even makes your team stronger than high-end artifact sets. So, always understand the enemy type and team requirements and adjust your builds instead of blindly following old templates. Final rule, pull the right units. Always prefer newer characters over older ones, since they're designed to be more future-proof and benefit from newer reactions. And never pull restricted units. Even though Skirk is the second strongest DPS in the game, her limitation of only working with Hydro and Cryo units makes her a huge liability. If you face cryo-resistant enemies, you'll have to bench her entirely. Compare that to Mavwika, who can be played in Overload, Melt, Vape, or even as a support and on-field DPS, making her far more versatile. With that, I've covered most of the core fundamentals and advanced tips for mastering Genshin's endgame. I hope this guide helped you. Until next time, take care and see you in the next one.